Hello, welcome. I'm Manoj Singh. Welcome to the DC South Asian Literary Festival series. Tonight, a book discussion by author Jyotsna Srinivasan. The book is These Americans. And tonight's moderator is Suma Muralidhar. She's a well-known figure in our society, a theater artist, a photographer, and also an executive in Veterans Administration. Welcome, Suma, and I'll hand it over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Manoj. Well, welcome everyone. Again, on behalf of the DC South Asian Arts Council, I welcome all of you. Today, we're honored to have as our guest Jyotsna Srinivasan, a writer and school teacher, and we will be discussing her latest book, These Americans. It's a collection of short stories and a novella about the life of Indian Americans. This collection won the Rosemary Daniel Fiction Prize from the publisher Minerva Rising Press, and Jyotsna's previous novel, On the Brink of Bloom, also about the life of Indian Americans, was a finalist for the PEN Bellwether Prize for Socially Engaged Fiction. Welcome, Jyotsna.
Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm thrilled to be here.
Yeah, it's a great pleasure to have you with us. You know, what a treat. First, I want to congratulate you on this book and also on your entire body of work. You have several other books to your credit. I just love the book. It's very thought-provoking. It covers a wide range of issues. And also, I like the way you interspersed humor in the middle of all these really heavy, serious, topics. And so it's quite entertaining in places as well. And I also love your writing style. It's very authentic. It's simple and it's very vivid. Almost every sentence I read evoked an image in my mind. And I sort of had this movie running in my head as I was reading these stories. It was just amazing. So thank you for this gift to the world, I would say.
Thank you. Thank you for saying all that. It's wonderful to hear that.
So maybe you can start us off with talking about the genesis of this book, the premise, and the underlying themes that runs across the stories.
Yeah, well, I mean, I have been writing these stories for probably about 15 years, not just the stories that are in this book, but just short stories in general, and having them published in, little literary magazines. So for a long time, I didn't really think about collecting them into a book. I was just writing based on the issues that came up for me, intergenerational conflict or cultural issues. And so then maybe 3 or 4 years ago, I thought, well, I have quite a few stories out there. I could collect some of them into a book. And then the question was, well, which ones and how to order them and what to call the collection. So that went through some stages. I would, change the order, change the title of the. So finally, we settled on this order, which is the stories are organized by the age of the second generation character. So in the first story, which is called Mirror, it's a new immigrant mom giving birth to her American daughter. And then the second story, and the characters are all different, but in the second story, the second generation daughter is 7 years old. And by the end, by the novella, the immigrant character is elderly and her daughter is middle-aged. So it's organized in that way.
Yeah, talk about the title. When you look at it at face, without any context, it's sort of seems like a finger pointing, these Americans.
Yeah.
Who are these Americans?
Yeah.
Tell us.
So what happened was originally when I was when this manuscript was accepted by the publisher, the title was The Americans. And I was Googling that title and found out that there was a TV show about Russian spies that was called The Americans. And so I told the publisher, we can't use the Americans because it's a show about Russian spies. And she's like, but I really want the word American in there, and which I agreed with. So I just went through, I kind of did a search of the manuscript for wherever the word American showed up and what other words were with it. And these Americans kept popping up. And it really is a phrase that, at least I heard my parents say, and it was a phrase that they would use to distinguish themselves from those other Americans out there. These Americans do X, Y, or Z, but we do something else. And it was a very uncomfortable phrase for me to hear because I identified as American. And so I'm sitting there at the dinner table and they're saying, these Americans are so whatever. And I'm thinking, you're talking about me. But I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't really understand why I felt uncomfortable. It was many years later that I was like, oh, because they are saying something about people that I think I'm part of that, And then also the title These Americans is like, my brother and I would say to my parents, well, you're American too, and then you should become citizens and you've been here for so long. And so we would, try to convince my parents to participate and to kind of acknowledge that they were Americans. But I still think that, I think if somebody were to ask my parents, where are you from? They would say India. So, whereas if someone asked me where I'm from, I say Ohio, because that's where I was born and raised. So, so the title is both a reflection of how, some of the immigrant characters may see themselves, and also an inclusive statement that we are all Americans.
I like that. I like how you made it inclusive. And so I loved every story. There are 8 short stories and then the novella. But there was some of them that just, tugged at my heart. So I thought that maybe what we could do is, I'd like to just read very short excerpts from a few of the stories and have you talk more about them, elaborate on that story.
Sure.
Does that sound good?
Yeah.
This way our audiences will get a flavor for all the stories and also the breadth of the issues that you cover in all of these. And so the first one is At Home. And this is about a little girl, Amia, 8 years old, the 3rd grade. And she is, this is on page 21, where her class teacher has announced that they will have an international fair at the school next month. And then it begins over there. And she says, every class will choose one country to learn about. And because we have someone from India in this class, Miss Ferdinand extended her arm in Amia's direction, we will choose India. Every head in the class turned to stare at Amia. She dropped her gaze to the desk. Her face burned. She wanted to disappear. What do you say, Amia? Miss Ferdinand coaxed. Amia wasn't sure what she was supposed to say. Thank you, she mumbled. Miss Ferdinand talked on and on, her voice raising and lowering itself, explaining about the international fair. Amia sat as still as she could. After many long moments, she dared to raise her eyes. Most heads had turned away from her, back to Miss Ferdinand. And Amia will carry the Indian flag in our parade, Miss Ferdinand concluded. Won't that be fun, Amia? All heads swiveled back to her. Amia's eyes returned to her desk. Your teacher called today, her mother said as they were having dinner. She says you're not happy about the international fair. Her mother stirred the pot of sambar in the middle of the table before ladling some of it onto her father's rice. How had Miss Ferdinand known, Amia wondered. Her class is going to represent India, her mother explained to Daddy. Miss Ferdinand thought that you would be excited about that, she said to Amia. Don't you want to carry the Indian flag in the parade? No, Amia said. Why not? Daddy asked. Amia shrugged. I just don't. How could she explain? She had worked so hard to be normal. At school, she often forgot she had brown skin and black hair and that she ate strange food at home. How could she march in the parade and remind all the kids that she was not normal? Well, take it away from there.
Yeah. What do you want me to?
Yeah. So, I feel that this is the age when children are just, trying to come into their own and try to find their place in the world. And I feel that this is such a tender age, and it must have been really hard to not only, to straddle the two worlds and to find her place.
Mhm.
So do you think that is true, that it's really hard at that age?
It can be very challenging. I think for her, like, this actually did happen, and I think it happens to a lot of kids, where if you're the only one of, the only person whose family is from India, or the only whatever, the kids will turn and look at you, and I remember being very uncomfortable. Every time the India section came up in the social studies book, everybody would turn and look at me. And then sometimes the teachers would ask me questions about India. I think a lot of times, as even I probably do this as a teacher, but the well-meaning teacher thinks, oh, I'll make her feel more comfortable by talking about this culture that she's from. But this girl, sometimes when you're second generation, you don't know that much about that culture, and you don't necessarily feel connected to it, or at least you start to realize that other people are seeing you in a different way, that you are not normal. That's how she put it. That you look foreign, or that. So I think, the well-meaning adults, and I'm sure I've done this too to some of my students, we call them out in a way that is uncomfortable for them, that because they're trying to blend in. And I think that's something that in the second generation, that's kind of like what happens in the second generation is we are becoming American. We are the becoming American generation often, because the United States is a land of immigrants largely. And but we're all American. Where does the becoming American part happen? And I think a lot of times it happens in the second generation. So it's almost like this is our job to figure out how to fit in. And the well-meaning teacher is kind of interrupting that job. And eventually, I think we do, or at least hopefully we figure out how to incorporate elements of our ancestral culture, to take an interest in that. And that did happen to me in kind of a sudden way in sixth grade. So we can talk about that. I don't know if I really dealt with that in this book, but I did shift. I had a shift in the sixth grade where I accepted my interest. I showed an interest. I started to I even wore an Indian outfit or an Indian top for my seventh grade school picture. I had big Indian hoop earrings. So
how did that happen? Was that, what drove that change?
Yeah. So I actually, until like a few weeks ago, I didn't know. And as I started to think about it, as I've been doing interviews like this about this book, and people would say, well, what happened? Because it was quite a dramatic shift. Well, at the beginning of sixth grade, for a few months, I had an Indian teacher for two subjects, language arts and social studies. And then we moved. So I only had her for a few months for a couple of classes. And at the time, I was not conscious that having her as a teacher made any difference at all. But I remember being worried when I found out that she was going to be teaching me some classes, that, oh, she's brown like me. She has an Indian accent. How will the kids, see her? And will they think she's weird? And then will they think I'm weird? And none of that worry, materialized. The kids just saw her as a regular teacher, and we learned, the regular subjects from her. But I think just seeing her being accepted as the leader of our class and being accepted by the other teachers, I think it gave me confidence and made me realize that I could accept those cultural aspects of my family and still be part of the school culture. So, but I wasn't aware. I really think that's what did it, but I was unconscious of that until very recently.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah. So I want to talk a little bit about the next story, Revolution. And maybe I'll just read the first couple of paragraphs from that story.
Okay.
And then we can talk about the issues there. Neil was 13 and his sister Anita was 10 when their parents split up. On a chilly day in March, his mother picked him up after his astronomy club meeting and told him. As he sat in the front seat listening to her, Neil tried to keep his mind on the fact that he, his mother, the car, and the freeway were at that moment spinning through space at 30 kilometers per second on their journey around the sun. In the months before the divorce was final, when Dad had moved out and was living on the other side of Newark in an unfurnished efficiency apartment, which contained almost nothing but a beanbag chair and empty Chinese food takeout boxes, Neil asked his parents many times why they were getting divorced. His father, T. Gopalakrishnan, would rub his small pot belly slowly and say, in his thick Indian accent, rolling his R's and enunciating each consonant strongly, "Your mother has decided she does not want to be married to me anymore." His mother, Linda, would toss her long brown hair over her shoulder and say, "Your father isn't interested in working on our marriage." Neil tried to point out to each parent that apparently things could work out if they simply admitted to each other that they wanted to stay married. They'd shake their heads and look at him searchingly. "No, Neil," they'd say, "it won't work. I'm sorry." So clearly, here we're talking about the issue of children dealing with the divorce of their parents, but there's also issues that the first generation, the parents, are going through. So can you talk about the issues that come up in this story?
Yeah. First of all, I love hearing you read because I don't normally get a chance to hear somebody else read the story. So it gives me a really interesting perspective. And I love the Indian accent. I can't do an Indian accent very well. So that was really nice. I think the germ of this story was actually when, Neil wants to find out whether his grandfather had participated in the independence movement. Later on, he goes to India. And so that was something that I wanted my relatives to have participated, because my parents would tell me about Gandhiji and the independence movement and the nonviolent protests. And I was sure that my relatives had a key role in this. And then I found out, no, they didn't. They were just kind of supporting from the sidelines. And so I was very disappointed. I was like, oh, but surely my relatives are heroes. But so that was the germ of it. And I don't even know how the rest of it got developed. I don't remember the genesis of the rest of it, because it's about a boy who is part Indian. And that is not autobiographical for me. At the time that I wrote the story, I am divorced now, but at the time I wrote the story, I was not. And then the whole he's interested in astronomy, so that's where partly where the title comes from, Revolution. I actually had another story that included this interest in astronomy, and I kind of put those two stories together. So somehow it emerged, and I don't remember the genesis of it.
Yeah, but that part about going to India, Neil and his dad going to India, I mean, it's hilarious in some ways, when he tries to get his grandfather's attention to to interview him and ask him about his participation in the India's freedom movement. And his grandfather is just is this tall, towering man with his own busy life, coffee at 7 a.m., breakfast at 8 and whatnot. And he just walks by and throws a math question at Neil all the time. And this actually evoked a lot of memories for me, because this would happen with me and my son whenever we visited India. And my son would always ask me, why do uncles in India always test my math proficiency? So that part of the story was very, very entertaining, actually. But it does, bring up a lot of serious issues about dealing with divorce, and then the interracial, marriage, the parents, and Neil looking for a male role model in his life, and all of that. Very well written.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. The next one is Dreams, and this is about twins, Malini and Pramod. They're in high school, And Pramod is having some trouble. He's skipping classes, he's failing his classes, and he's actually been caught smoking on school premises, and he's been sent home with a suspension notice for 3 days. And I just wanted to read a section over there at home, this scenario at home. No, Dad shakes his head. They're at the dinner table. The kitchen smells of incense from the evening puja and warm rice and fried mustard seeds. The white paper with the red circle is on the table in front of Dad, where Malini put it a moment ago, and that's the suspension notice. Pramod is sleeping upstairs. He does not need to see any counselor, Dad booms. Pramod has been disobedient. He's being punished. He will learn that is enough. These Americans are always running to counselors and still have problems. They cannot stay married to each other, not even when they have a sick child to take care of. Indians are different. We handle our problems within the family. And in our family, we do not have such serious problems that we need to tell strangers about them. But he's failing his class. Mom is on the verge of tears. Her hands are in her lap and she hasn't touched the rice on her plate. Malini puts out her hand and slides the white paper towards her. He will have to study harder, that is all, Dad declaims. There is nothing wrong with him. He's a strong, healthy boy. He's just lazy. So, this story really hit me hard because sometimes I wonder, it all comes from love, and we want our children to be really successful. We want them to do better than we did.
Mm-hmm.
We want them to be financially secure. We want them to have wonderful careers, happy marriages, and on and on.
Mm-hmm.
And I wonder sometimes, do we become so singularly focused on that aspect that even when there are symptoms of trouble staring at us in the face, as it does in the story, we don't acknowledge it, or worse, we actively deny it. So I think, you bring up, through this story, I thought this was tremendous, very powerful, the way you brought up this issue, that this is something I feel that our generation needs to really go in deep inside and reflect on, this stigma that we worry about, and especially when it comes to mental health and well-being issues, so
Yeah.
I applaud you for
Okay.
bringing this in here.
Thank you. Yeah, I agree with you. I think, a lot of times the immigrant generation, as you say, comes and they see the American dream as an economic dream, and they want the best for their kids, and they want to do the best for their kids. And I think sometimes maybe the second generation, we see, for us, the American dream is freedom to choose, freedom to explore, and freedom to explore maybe our, mental health issues too. And I think, at least in my family growing up, I think, first of all, there is a stigma about mental health issues. And second of all, I think my parents were, hesitant to see a counselor because they did not, and this was, of course, many years ago, they did not know if the counselor would understand their culture and their issues. And they were afraid that the counselor would say, you're doing everything wrong. And, so that was, they were trying so hard to do the best they could for their kids. And it's hard. It is definitely hard because you don't have elders maybe to talk to. The elders are in India. They may not understand these what is going on. So you don't have the networks that you have in India where you can talk to your old friend, or you can talk to, and that people are going to understand what you're going through. And so I think it's can be really difficult. Hopefully it's better now, because I think there are South Asian counselors, and hopefully we have more resources now.
Yeah, things are changing, but you're right. There's a social support structure there that's not here, and So, but it was very powerful. I really like the way you treated that subject, and
Thank you.
Yeah. And then the next one is the sweater. This was one of my favorites.
Mhm.
So this story is written in first person.
Mhm.
And, it's about a mother-daughter relationship. And I just wanted to just read the first couple of paragraphs from this. I don't care what mom says. This is good yarn. It's directly from the sheep. No dyes, no treatments, completely natural. Mom could care less about all of that, of course. I bought it from a woman who raises sheep near here. There was a craft fair on campus a few weeks ago, and she had a table there. Mom asked, "Why did you buy such a dull color?" It's sort of a mottled tan, a mix of the white and black sheep wools. And she said, "It's so rough." Well, it's not lamb's wool. I went to visit mom and dad last weekend. I don't know why I bothered. I guess I had nothing better to do since Josh left. I didn't tell them about Josh leaving, of course. I'm not supposed to be dating him. I'm supposed to get to know some nice Indian boys. I can't stand going to those India Student Association events where with everyone all concerned about who's going to make the most money. So, this is all about expectations, and sometimes it's real and sometimes it's perceived. We think that our parents want something of us, and that may not always be the case.
Mhm.
So I think those two things were very beautifully described here. Do you want to add anything about the relationship of the mother-daughter in this story?
Yeah. So my mom did teach me a lot of needlework when I was,
Mm.
and I wanted, because she was very involved with embroidery and she did all sorts of crochet, knitting. If it was a craft, she was doing it. I mean, she did flower arranging, everything. And so I wanted to do the same thing, obviously. And so I bugged her, teach me, teach me. And so she would teach me. She was very patient and she taught me to embroider, crochet, knit, everything. And then when I did actually, it's described how she makes this particular sweater in the story. And I did actually make a sweater like that in this story. She's a college student avoiding studying and making the sweater instead of studying. But I actually made the sweater many years later. But I did base the story on the sweater and then just on having that conflict, because she wants to do this craft that her mother taught her, but she's doing it in her own way. She's learning the German way of knitting rather than the English way that her mother taught her. So she constantly is talking about how she's doing it differently. But then she also admires very much her mother's amazing skill at needlework.
Yeah. And I like the metaphor, the knitting as a metaphor for building relationships, navigating the tangles and the knots and all of that. So was that a conscious interjection of that?
No, it really wasn't. The symbolism kind of blew by me, and it's only now that people are saying it. I was like, yeah, I guess that's in there. So yeah,
yeah, that must have come out at a subconscious level.
Yeah,
as you're writing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And my mother, I really did get a hole in that particular sweater. And my mother really did fix it in an invisible way. So, and of course I was much older. I was like, so the dynamics were different, but I was amazed. I was like, Mom, I can't believe you fixed this. And she's like, oh, you had the yarn. I fixed it. It was not a big deal to her, but.
Yeah. One more short story. Mrs. Raghavendra's daughter. This is also about a mother-daughter relationship with a slightly different twist. So again, I just want to read a couple of paragraphs and then talk a little bit about it.
Mm-hmm.
Mrs. Raghavendra has discovered the purpose of life. She's sitting at her kitchen table, considering her discovery while drinking her afternoon coffee. As she thinks, she presses her fingertip over a mess of crumbs sprinkled on the placemat, which shows a view of Niagara Falls. This placemat was bought back when her husband was alive, back when she still took trips to see tourist attractions. The crumbs are from the one vanilla cookie she has just eaten, as she does every afternoon. She would have liked to eat a chocolate chip cookie, but 3 years ago she made a vow to give up chocolate until her daughter Anjana got married. So you can see where the story is going, sort of, with that introduction. And just, just from what I read all about the cookie and the crumbs and everything, the vivid imagery that your writing evokes, it's so clear and everything, it just comes across here. So this is something, so her daughter Anjana is actually, she's in her 30s. She's very successful, independent. She's a lawyer.
I think she's in her 20s because she's
20s? Okay.
recently graduated from law school, maybe late 20s, I would say.
Okay.
Something
Okay.
like that.
And so she's, her biggest worry is like her daughter isn't married and she wants to find her a good Indian husband. And that's the sole purpose of her life, essentially, at this point. And she visits her daughter and, she starts suspecting a few things, and she wonders why her daughter, who's so independent and successful, first of all, needs to have a roommate. And then she sees that there's just one bed in the apartment. And then there are other clues. And I'm going to reveal the story, but, I think it's sort of essential here that the clues lead her to the discovery that her daughter is lesbian.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's just, it was so well written, like the whole discovery process. There's a sweet innocence about it, and it's kind of sad too, and there's a bright side to it. And in the end, she goes back home. She doesn't ask Anjana anything. Her daughter doesn't say anything to her. Her partner doesn't say anything to her. So no one says anything, but the reader knows that the mom now knows that her daughter is lesbian, and she's accepted it.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought it was just so beautifully done, this whole thing. And and by the way, all the endings of your stories, they're very, they are sort of, you don't find a clear-cut resolution to anything. You kind of, leave it there, sort of giving hints about what happened. And so the reader kind of, has to think about what happened, and maybe even ponder that, what would happen to these characters if the story continued. I just love that. So it made me do that in every story. So
yeah, I definitely want to invite the reader in to give the,
Yeah. So, then we move on to the novella. So that's about half of the book is the novella, Hawk. And this Hawk is actually a revised version of a novel you wrote previously called On the Brink of Bloom. And that novel was a finalist for the Penn Bellwether Prize for socially engaged fiction. So, this novel, I have so many questions and so much to talk about this novella, but the first question is, why did you decide to go from a novel to a novella and change the title? I'm just curious about that.
Yeah. Well, so that novel was, I guess it worked on some level because they thought it was good enough to be a finalist, but it just really wasn't working as it was just kind of all over the place. There were just like strands of things. And I just couldn't figure out how to make it gel and have an impact. I just felt like it was kind of amorphous and, shapeless. And the character of Bhagya is pretty much the same, because she was the kind of the germ of the story. I really wanted to write a story of something about an Indian woman physician, because that is kind of like a tradition. Indian women they want to go to a woman doctor. And so women have been getting trained as doctors. And, whereas in the US, women were not allowed to go to medical school, when in India, they were definitely going to medical school, right? So I thought, this is great. I want to write about this. And so I created the character of Bhagyana. Originally had like two different characters. The daughter that's in the novella now, she was originally two different characters. And I ended up putting them both together. And I feel like it had more of a emotional impact. I'm really fascinated by the novella format because it's, short enough to read in a couple days, but long enough where you can get into some character, some deep characterization and kind of more involved issues. So for many years, I've been kind of seeking out novellas by women, because when you think of novellas in English, you often think about, Of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck, or Lord of the Flies, or something like that. And I thought, well, where are the novellas by women? So I've been kind of seeking those out and reading those. And then I thought, okay, well, I could try writing a novella. And I just thought I would try it and see how it worked. And it seemed like it was gelling. And so I just went with it.
Yeah, no, it's beautifully written. And,
thank you.
It's very heartrending. I mean, so the Bhagya is as a mother who came here in the 1960s and as a medical doctor, and then her daughter. So, and they have, the love that they have for each other is very palpable in your writing, but yet they are not able to express it to each other. There's so many gaps in their communication. So that is so, it's very moving. And I almost wish like I could take a magic wand and make it all right for them, it's that feeling as you read that story.
Yeah.
And this was a finalist for socially engaged fiction. So talk about some of the social issues that you bring about in this novella.
Well, one of them is physician-assisted suicide. So that is a big issue in this novella. And then the other one is discrimination at work. The daughter experiences some discrimination at work. So, I guess those were the two issues that fit into that category of socially engaged fiction.
Yeah. So I think the daughter facing discrimination at work, I think that's so relevant even today, and particularly in these recent times, after George Floyd last year. I work for the federal government, and I know that every federal agency and every private sector, diversity, equity, and inclusion is like it's a big byline. Everybody is trying to do that as an initiative. And this story just, made me think about that. And, are we just being reactive, or are we really trying to change, the way people think about others who are different from ourselves in whatever color, race, gender, so it was very relevant, and I really liked reading about that. And the mom faced her own prejudices when
she did. She did. Mm-hmm.
And although those have changed, this thing about race or gender, or this type of discrimination is still very relevant.
Mm-hmm.
And then the whole assisted suicide issue, that just took me by total surprise in the story. And it's bold, and it's very poignant and moving. I mean, this elderly, her mother gets a diagnosis of dementia, and she decides to end her life. And, so this topic is not talked about much, and it's not written about much. And when it is, there are very strong opinions. So, so what compelled you to bring that issue into this context of this story?
Well, I had been fascinated by that whole issue for many years. I first heard about it when an author I admire, her name is Carolyn Heilbrunn, she was not diagnosed with anything. She just decided that she was going to take control of the end of her life. And that was kind of shocking. I wasn't sure that I wanted to totally do what she did, but I was very fascinated by the idea of having control of when your life ended. And so I just started, I guess, thinking about that, reading about it, reading about the different methods that people could use. And also the idea that Bhagya had something, she had been asked to help a terminally ill woman as a doctor. She had been asked this, and she did do that. I didn't want to give too much away. I guess we are kind of giving it all away.
Yeah.
But that was, it caused her to lose her job, basically. So, but she won't tell her daughter this. That's as you mentioned, they are having, they don't communicate well. as
Yeah.
much as they love each other. So she was a pioneer in many ways, and this was another way that she was a pioneer. And she does try to explain herself. I don't know if her daughter totally accepts or understands why she did what she did. I think her daughter is, very upset and shocked and all of that.
Yeah. So, but I also like the way she, she tells her story to her daughter through these letters that she's journaling, that her daughter supposedly finds later on after she's gone. So that whole thing was very moving as well. I just loved it. So, I think just a general question in all of your stories, you of course naturally presented the second generation perspective very eloquently. I mean, you've lived through it. But what to me was very impressive and outstanding was you presented the first generation's perspective equally effectively. So how did that happen? And was there a defined incident in your life when you began to appreciate these perspectives of the first generation, or did it happen over time?
It was, So when I was I was in my 30s, and I did have a child, so that may have helped that I became a mother.
Yes.
But I was at but until that time, I had really only written from the perspective of someone who was just like me. So I hadn't been able to write from the perspective of any other character. So I was at a writing conference, and I heard a lecture on point of view. So like, what point of view would you choose, and et cetera. And this was 20 years ago. And so I immediately went we were at a university. And so I went to the library at that university and started typing a story. And I was going to write about, an Indian American teenager having a conflict with her father, but write it from the father's perspective. So that was the first time that I tried it. And I really tried to put myself in the shoes of that father, who was very much like my own father, and really became present to how frustrated he was with how frustrated he was that he couldn't communicate with his teenage daughter. And that story is not in this book, by the way. So I became aware of his point of view, that he was trying hard. He was trying his best to communicate with her in the way that he knew how, and it wasn't working. She was still mad at him. And I became present to the love, the deep love that he had for her. Then, by contrast, the deep love that my father had for me. So even though, like you say, a lot of times immigrant parents are strict and have a lot of expectations, which my parents did. But I really became present to that love. And then I think probably just growing up, my own maturity, maybe my own spiritual growth helped me to try to step into those shoes. And so, and actually the first story, which is basically what my mother has told me about my birth, it's about a new immigrant mom giving birth. So she had told me that story. So I was doing a writing exercise in which, just a writing exercise that I found in a book, that you were supposed to kind of go back to your early childhood and write something in the voice, like the kind of a language of early childhood. And I guess I went back too far, because I ended up writing the story from in my mother's voice, giving birth to me or giving birth, Yeah. So, thank you for saying that you think it rings true. My parents have read all these stories. So they read they don't critique them as I go along. I mean, when it's final, I will, like before this book was published, they did read them all. They had also read them when they were in literary magazines. And and they seem to feel that they rang true. My mom was like, "Oh, but they're so sad. Why are they so sad?" And so, but overall, she, they felt that it was speaking their language, basically. Yeah.
Yeah. That's amazing.
Yeah. And I think some of it is because, when you're a kid, your life, your whole world is your parents. And so you're very aware of what their likes. You're kind of very hyper. It's almost like being hyper aware of your boss, whereas your boss might not know you that well, but you probably know your boss really well.
Mhm.
It's kind of like that. Was a kid, you are really always looking to see, okay, is mom accepting this? Is she happy? Is she sad? And why? And you're trying to figure out how to make her happy. You know? So I think that's part of it.
Yeah. No, that's beautiful. You did a great job.
Thank you.
Yeah. And so you're a writer, but you're also a school teacher, and you teach middle school and high school. And as I understand, you teach a group of neurodiverse children. Is that correct? Yes. So I'm just curious. So does all this experience that you have, as a second generation, and in terms of straddling two worlds and being accepting of others, does that help you in your teaching and helping your students become more accepting of people who are different from them?
I mean, maybe. I think part of it is just being the brown person in the room, I think is huge. I mean, most of the teachers at our school are white. Most teachers are white. I mean, Indian American kids don't become teachers. We're supposed to become doctors and engineers, right? so there's not that many of us who are teachers. So just being the brown person in the room, I think, is probably pretty big. I try to approach each person as an individual, I guess, and not make assumptions about them, because I hated it when people made assumptions about me and, tried to say, well, you should be interested in this, or why aren't you? And, I can't believe you aren't, and all that. So I just try to accept them for who they are and find out what they are interested in, and like that. So I think,
And do you think it's any easier for the third generation, or the grandparents' influence still very much there that they?
Well, so I think we kind of broke down the walls, my brother and I, in terms of my family. We did all the rebellious stuff, and now my parents are like, "Thank you for giving us grandchildren," and they're just spoiling the grandchildren rotten. My boys are also they're half Indian, so they had to they're mixed race. So I think that's an issue that they're having to deal with that I didn't have to deal with. So also two different religions. So I was raised Hindu, of course, and my ex-husband was raised Jewish. So we would celebrate both holidays, and they went to Jewish Sunday school and Hindu Sunday school, and they just did it all, I guess. And I mean, I think it was in a way maybe easier for them, because both of us were born both born and raised in the U.S. And so, maybe those kinds of cultural issues there was not such a cultural disconnect. But I think, they had, I think they've had to figure out, who they are. And I don't know if they would, I think my son would identify as a person of color, especially since his girlfriend very much does. And she's half Egyptian. And so, and I don't know about my younger son. I'm not sure that he's really ready to think about that right now. He's thinking about other things. I tried not to put very many expectations on them at all, because what I found is that the thing that really influenced me with my parents was just their oh my God, now the word is blanking. Just their example, So they were vegetarians, but they never, in fact, they didn't force us at all to be vegetarians. They would serve us, like my mom would serve us bacon and things like that. And so but my brother and I both became vegetarians just because of their example, not because they were saying you have to or whatever. So I knew that if I said you have to, then the rebellion starts,
Right.
So right. I mean, then there were times when I did say you have to, like, you have to learn swimming, and you have to go to Indian Sunday school up until a certain age. I mean, when my older son turned, like, I don't know, 11 or 12, I don't know. I just kind of gave up at that point, but he had gotten some of it. So I think when they're younger, you can push them, and then
and I think it's really about just exposing them, giving those opportunities, and then letting them choose.
Where
they want to take that.
That's true. I mean, there were certain things that you have to take a shower and use soap. No, you have to put your seatbelt on. I mean, there's no question about it. So, so just kind of also, and then, but we didn't insist. We wanted them to learn music. We had a piano in the house. Dad was willing to teach them or get lessons. Neither one of them really, that didn't catch on with them, but they were both interested in sports. And so that's kind of where they put their time.
Yeah.
And then just really trying to, as they got older, trying to help them tap into their own wisdom. Because I feel like sometimes, if parents force the child too much, we tend to lose sight of our own wisdom. Like our own navigation gets mixed up. You know what I mean? So we don't know which direction to go because we don't trust ourselves.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
That's a great point. So my last question would be, what can we as a society and as a community do to help bridge this intergenerational gap? It's all coming from love. We know that.
Yeah.
But there's, it's just the mutual understanding is an issue. And how can we help raise awareness of what it's like to be in the other's shoes? I mean, what you're doing is a great way. I mean, you're writing about it, and I think there's more awareness when you write about it, read about it, talk about it. Do you have any thoughts?
One thing that just occurred, I thought about today. So the role of grandparents is kind of missing here. So I remember, when I was in India, my mom might be strict or scolding, and then my aunt or my grandmother would say, "Oh, it's okay. Let her do it." You know? And so and maybe we're missing the role of the grandparents to say, "You know what? It's okay." Or to what do you think?
A buffer, you mean? Like,
yeah, to say, to kind of take the kid's side. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, maybe that's maybe.
Yeah. So, because it's good to have I think parents are overwhelmed and wanting to do the best for their kid, and it would be great if they could take the time or just lower their stress enough to listen to the child, to learn from their child, especially as they become teenagers, to learn from the child as well as have the child learn from them. And also have fun with their child. And I feel like that's maybe missing, because the grandparent has fun with the kids. Like my parents are spoiling my kids rotten while I'm saying, no, you need to do this and this and this. So yeah, but we can't import our grandparents, all the time.
No, that's true. I mean, that could help. I think really it's really trying to understand. I feel like we have to let go of our expectations, like sort of that's like the bottom line.
Especially as the kid gets older, like, and then maybe trying to understand them. It's hard when I can kind of see the parent perspective too, because you don't want to mess up. You want to do the right. You don't want to mess this up. Yeah.
You want to be there to guide them, and it's a tough one. But I think you really did a great job of bringing both perspectives out in this book, and I think we need more dialogues like this, and in the communities and in our society to talk about this, so we can understand the other point of view. So is there anything else that we did not cover that you would like to share with our audience?
I don't think. Well, there's a couple of comments. Should we look and see what those comments are? Here, let's see. How do we get to them?
Why don't I see them? Well, are you seeing them? That's great.
Oh, okay. Oh, somebody says you read amazingly well, Suma. And then someone else is interesting.
Thank you.
They're not really questions, so.
Okay. Yeah. So, I just wanted to say a couple of things. I think you're doing a book club discussion on this book at Chai Connect on November 20th. Yeah. So, among our viewers, if we have inspired you to get the book now and read it, I think that would be a great thing, and to try and join that discussion if you're interested. And I do want to tell everyone about your website. It's, there's a lot of information there. I would really encourage everyone to go and take a look. www.secondgenstories, secondgenstories.com.
Mm-hmm.
And the book, of course, is available on Amazon and also on, is it bookshop.com?
Bookshop, yeah, bookshop.org. So that
Org,
would support
yeah.
independent bookstores. And you can ask for it at any bookstore.
Okay,
You have
yeah.
your neighborhood bookstore, they can order it for you. If you want to ask your library to order it, I would love that. I'm trying to get it into more libraries. So
yeah, no, I think it's a great read. And I think, it's really good for Indian Americans of all generations, first of all. And it's great for any immigrant and any American. I think it's really important that the local Americans also understand these perspectives, where these different cultures come from. And anyone, I mean, really, at the core, you're really talking about some very basic human experiences, wanting to belong, trying to fit in, being rejected, navigating relationships, whether it's a romantic relationship or familial or friendships. You cover all of that in this book. And I think, so I'm a huge fan of yours now, by the way, and I'm going to be following your work.
Okay, so somebody has a question here. It says, have you written about Indian immigrants and their issues adjusting to the American way? I mean, I think there are some stories in this book that would address that, especially in Hawk. So when the immigrant doctor, she comes over as a doctor and she has to figure out how to dress, and she doesn't want to bring her Indian food in for lunch, and all of the different things that she feels she needs to do to fit into her job.
Okay, so I'll just thank you on behalf of myself, all our audiences, and also the DC South Asian Arts Council. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you. It's been wonderful.
Wonderful conversation. And I wish you all the best.
Yeah. Yes, we'll keep in touch.